1944. California. The night is perfectly still, but the ground trembles. Inside a German POW camp near San Diego, Captain Karl Brenner of the Wehrmacht wakes up in the darkness, heart pounding. He thinks it's an earthquake. The desert floor is shaking, sand rolling off the edge of his cot. He rushes to the window of the wooden barrack, peers through the slits of the blinds. Beyond the barbed wire, floodlights cut the night open like blades. Hundreds of American Marines are running, shouting, crawling, leaping over obstacles under a full moon. The sound of boots, grunts, and command shouts fuse into one rhythmic roar, a storm of effort. Brenner had been told the Americans were soft, that they lacked discipline, that they drank, laughed, and slept early. Yet here, long after midnight, he watches them move like a single living organism. Some collapse from exhaustion, others drag them back to their feet. No one orders them. No one stops. He presses his palm against the glass, cold with desert condensation, and whispers to himself, "They are still training." The irony cuts deep. In Germany, lights were out by 10, curfews enforced with threats. Here, under the same moon, a different kind of army refuses to rest. The floodlights flicker over faces streaked with mud and sweat. Men young enough to be his students, but trained like machines carved from belief. The ground shakes again as they charge through the final obstacle line, rifles raised, voices echoing across the hills. In that moment, Brenner's mind fractures. Not from fear, but realization. He remembers what they told him in officer school. America has no will. But this night, in the desert of California, he sees a nation that does not sleep to become strong. If you value stories like this, the voice continues, calm but deliberate, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. He watches until dawn breaks behind the mountains and the noise fades into silence. But the image, the sight of men training until their lungs burn, will never leave him. The next morning, the desert is still. The sun climbs mercilessly above the camp, painting everything in white heat. Karl Brenner sits by the wire fence, eyes fixed on the field where he saw the Marines last night. His uniform, once crisp, has faded from sand and sun. Around him, other German officers stir, half curious, half irritated. The aftertaste of confusion from the night before still lingering. He spots an American guard leaning against a post, helmet tilted back, cigarette between his lips. The man seems relaxed, almost lazy, but his posture holds quiet control. Brenner approaches, his English stiff but clear. "Who ordered them to train so late?" he asks. The guard exhales a stream of smoke, looks at him and grins. "No one," he says simply. "They do it because they want to stay alive." Brenner blinks. "No orders?" The guard shrugs. "We get orders, sure, but what you saw last night, that wasn't about orders. That was about surviving the next war." The German officer stands silent, struggling to process the idea. In the Wehrmacht, obedience had been oxygen. You followed orders or vanished. Every movement, every breath, every gesture came from fear. Fear of failure, fear of punishment, fear of being seen as weak. To act without orders was chaos. To train voluntarily was absurd. But these Americans, these so-called amateurs, had found strength not from fear, but from choice. Later that day, the camp's interpreter, a young man from Chicago with a soft accent, explains to the prisoners that the Marines rotate training shifts, some going through night drills by preference. "They say it keeps them sharp," he adds casually, "and helps them sleep better when the body's spent." One German lieutenant laughs bitterly. "Sleep better? We train to conquer Europe, not to sleep better." Brenner doesn't laugh. The guard's words echo inside him. They want to stay alive. He writes in his journal that evening, "We thought survival was cowardice. Here, it's a purpose." The transformation begins not with defeat, but with the slow unraveling of certainty. For the first time, Brenner wonders if what he had called discipline was really just fear wearing a uniform. As the sun dips, the camp falls into routine. The clang of mess tins, the murmurs of prayer, the rhythmic tapping of boots at roll call. Then, from beyond the fence, that same sound returns. Shouting, laughter, the thud of boots in dust. Another night of training begins. Brenner closes his journal and listens. Somewhere deep inside, a crack forms. Quiet, but irreversible. He looks to the horizon, where the floodlights flare again, and whispers, "So this is how they win. Not by command, but by will." By the third week in California, the prisoners have grown used to the rhythm of the camp. Reveille at dawn, head count, work detail, rations, and silence. Yet each afternoon, the desert wind carries the sound of distant shouting and laughter from the Marine training grounds beyond the ridge. It becomes a strange kind of music, foreign and defiant. One afternoon, they are marched out for observation duty, a supervised exercise intended to show them American efficiency. Brenner and the others expect a display of machinery, perhaps a parade of weapons. Instead, they find themselves standing under a sun that feels close enough to burn through their uniforms. The temperature climbs above 40 degrees Celsius. Heat ripples off the sand. Dust clings to every breath. Down in the training pit, hundreds of Marines crawl through mud, their helmets glinting, rifles slung across their backs. Smoke bombs burst nearby, masking visibility, while instructors bark commands. From time to time, a whistle blows, and the men leap, roll, reload, and charge. But what shocks the Germans most isn't the discipline, it's the laughter. Marines joke as they push through the obstacle course. One shouts, "Loser buys beer tonight." Another slips, rolls in the mud, and bursts out laughing. They tease, compete, and help each other up. A rhythm of camaraderie pulses through the chaos. Brutal, yet strangely joyful. A young German sergeant murmurs, "They laugh while crawling." Brenner replies quietly, "No, they believe that sweating today spares blood tomorrow." For a long time, the group says nothing. They watch the Marines finish the circuit, mud-caked and gasping, yet grinning as if they had just conquered something invisible. That night, in the barracks, the conversation turns uneasy. One officer sneers, "They act like children." Another answers, "Maybe that's why they keep going. They've found joy in the hardship." It's an idea so alien that the room falls silent. Brenner sits apart, notebook open. He writes, "In our army, suffering was sacred but silent. Here it is loud, shared, and somehow human." Outside, faint echoes drift across the desert again, laughter mingling with the clang of equipment. It is not the sound of mockery. It is the sound of a people unashamed of effort. He closes his eyes, recalling the faces of his men on the Eastern Front, cold, mechanical, afraid to smile. The contrast gnaws at him. Perhaps, he thinks, strength isn't forged by fear after all, but by belief. As the lights dim, a dust storm begins to roll in from the west, smearing the moonlight. Brenner lies awake, listening to the wind and to his own unease. The laughter still echoes faintly in his mind, bright, untouchable, and utterly free. The next week, the prisoners are assigned to assist with cleaning equipment near the Marine training field. It is the closest they have ever been to the American soldiers in action. The desert air is heavy with the smell of oil and sweat. Brenner wipes down metal crates while glancing toward the exercise area. A whistle cuts through the heat, and the Marines begin another round of drills. Their shouts rise and fall in rhythm, a living metronome of discipline. Brenner watches through the fence, fascinated by how synchronized they move without visible fear. Then something unexpected happens. A young Marine, no older than 20, collapses midway through a sprint, clutching his leg. Another soldier immediately drops beside him, loosening his bootlaces. A third kneels to help. In seconds, they have the man's shoe off, his cramped foot massaged, laces tied again. And then, without hesitation, all three rise and run forward together. The moment is brief, almost invisible, but it slices through Brenner's chest like shrapnel. He turns away quickly, pretending to polish a wrench. That evening, as the prisoners gather for their sparse supper, one of them jokes, "Did you see how that American knelt like a servant? In our army, he'd be punished for breaking formation." Brenner doesn't answer. His hands tremble slightly as he folds his tin cup. "We were taught that strength means standing alone," he says quietly. "But they believe strength means standing together." The barracks falls silent. Even the wind seems to pause. He writes again in his journal that night, "We measured loyalty by obedience. They measure it by compassion. Perhaps that is the difference between a soldier and a man." Later, unable to sleep, he walks toward the fence. Beyond it, floodlights stretch across the desert. He can see silhouettes. Marines, still running laps, shouting words he can't understand. Their voices blend into the night like waves breaking against the shore. He remembers a different scene, Stalingrad, 1942. His men starving, freezing, and silent. No laughter, no helping hands, only fear of being the next to fall. He realizes with a hollow ache that cruelty had been disguised as courage. The camp's generator hums softly. Somewhere a coyote howls. And for a fleeting second, Brenner feels that the world he believed in, the world built on fear, pride, and blind strength, is beginning to crumble. When he finally turns away from the fence, dawn is coming. The first rays of sunlight strike the mud-caked field where the Marines trained. The footprints are deep and chaotic, but they all move in the same direction. He whispers, almost reverently, "They are never alone." Days pass, and the prisoner's curiosity becomes uneasy respect. The desert wind carries dust and doubt in equal measure. One evening, after lights out, Brenner sits at the edge of his bunk with a pencil stub and a torn piece of paper. Around him, the barracks is filled with whispers, the sound of men arguing quietly about things they never dared to question before. Lieutenant Vogel, once the most fanatical among them, snaps, "You're all fools. Don't be tricked by their show. It's propaganda." Brenner looks up. "Is it propaganda when you see it with your own eyes?" Vogel sneers. "They let us see what they want. They act for us." But the memory of that Marine kneeling to help his comrade refuses to fade. "Then they act the same when no one is watching," Brenner says calmly. "I saw it at night." The room falls into silence. Even the mosquitoes seem to hold still. In his notebook, Brenner writes, "If they are weak, why are we behind the fence and not them?" It's the question no one wants to answer. The next morning, rumors spread through the camp. The Allies have landed in Normandy. The guards say little, but the radio in the command post hums with coded words. Omaha, Utah, success. Some prisoners cheer secretly, believing Germany's enemies will soon drown in their own arrogance. Others, like Brenner, feel something else, the slow burn of realization. During lunch, an older officer mutters, "They fight not to prove they are strong, but to protect something." Brenner closes his eyes. That sentence feels like a verdict. He remembers a propaganda speech he once gave in France. "Victory will purify the weak." Now, the phrase sounds hollow. What if strength, real strength, isn't in domination, but in endurance, in the willingness to sweat and to serve? That night, the barracks grows quiet again. Outside, the Marines' floodlights glow in the distance, flickering through the dust like stars too close to the earth. The prisoners lie awake, each fighting a different kind of battle, between what they were taught and what they now see. Brenner whispers into the dark, "Maybe we were not defeated by their weapons, but by their belief." And then, as if answering him, the sound returns. Men running, shouting, laughing under the moon. It is the same sound that woke him weeks ago, but now it no longer feels threatening. It feels alive. If you were in his place, surrounded by the collapse of everything you once believed, would you have the courage to admit you'd been wrong? Or would you cling to the lie because it's all you have left? The transformation comes quietly, without announcement. One evening, as the desert cools and the horizon bleeds orange, a group of American officers walk toward the fence. They're relaxed, chatting, their sleeves rolled, uniforms streaked with dust. The prisoners, standing in loose formation, look up curiously. Among them, Brenner straightens instinctively. The senior officer, Captain Howard, calls out in friendly tone, "We're doing another night drill. You boys want to watch?" Laughter ripples through the Germans. Uncertain, awkward. One of them mutters, "Entertainment for the prisoners." Howard grins. Not entertainment, education. Later that night, under floodlights, the Marines begin their course again. Smoke, grenades hiss. Whistles pierce the dark. Mud, shouting, sweat, chaos. The same intensity as before, but closer now. Brenner stands at the fence, hands gripping the wire. The guards don't stop him. For the first time, he feels the heat of the lamps, the spray of sand kicked up by boots. Suddenly, Howard turns toward him and shouts, "You want to try?" The camp freezes. Brenner laughs nervously. "If I do, will you give me freedom?" Howard doesn't smile this time. "No," he says, "but you'll understand why we have it." The words land heavier than any bullet. Brenner hesitates, then steps forward until the fence presses against his chest. He says nothing. The Marines continue, shouting encouragement, lifting one another over walls, dragging their weakest by the arms. Brenner watches, his heart pounding. In that moment, he knows Howard's meaning. Freedom isn't granted. It's earned, guarded, rebuilt every day through effort and unity. Inside the barracks that night, no one sleeps. Some whisper mockingly, "He wanted to crawl in their mud." Others stare at the ceiling, thinking of home, of silence, of obedience. Brenner opens his journal again. They train not because they must, but because they can. They obey no fear, and that is the true discipline. For a long time, he stares at those words until the ink bleeds. Then he tears the page out, folds it, and slips it between the boards of his bunk. Not to hide it, but to leave it behind, a piece of truth buried in the camp itself. Outside, the drills continue past midnight. The rhythmic shouts rise and fall, echoing against the mountains. Brenner listens, imagining himself among them, crawling, falling, laughing. He whispers into the dark, "Now I understand." And you, watching this, hearing his story, if freedom demanded not glory but humility, would you still fight for it? 30 years later, in the spring of 1974, an old man steps out of a rental car near Camp Pendleton. His gait is slow but deliberate. His name is Carl Brenner, retired teacher, former Wehrmacht officer, former prisoner of war. The California air feels the same, warm, dry, filled with the faint smell of salt and dust. He walks toward the perimeter fence where the old POW camp once stood. Most of it is gone now, replaced by concrete barracks and neat lawns. But some parts remain. The outline of foundations, the faint marks where the watchtowers once rose. He stands there for a long time, hands behind his back, watching a new generation of Marines training on the same ground. Floodlights sweep across the field. Boots strike sand. Orders echo. The rhythm is identical to the one that haunted his nights decades earlier. A young Marine passes by, stops, and greets him politely. "Evening, sir. You here for the Veterans Tour?" Brenner shakes his head. "No, I was a prisoner here." The Marine blinks, unsure if he heard correctly. "Here? In the 40s? "Yes," Brenner replies softly. "Back then, I thought you were insane, training until your bodies broke. But I understand now." He gestures toward the men running through the floodlit course. Freedom isn't softness, it's discipline without fear. The Marine nods, still uncertain how to respond, then salutes and walks off. Brenner watches him join his squad, voices merging into one. He feels something inside him settle. Not peace exactly, but closure. He walks along the fence until he finds a small memorial plaque. In honor of all who trained and served here, in war and in peace. The metal glints under the moonlight. He reaches into his coat and pulls out an old, folded piece of paper. Yellowed, edges brittle. It's the same page he tore from his journal in 1944. The ink has faded, but the words remain. They train not because they must, but because they can. He presses it gently against the fence, watching the paper tremble in the wind, then lets it go. The breeze carries it into the darkness beyond the floodlights. Somewhere, a whistle blows. The Marines keep running, their voices rising through the night. Laughter, effort, unity. Brenner closes his eyes and listens. The sound is no longer foreign. It feels like memory, like truth. He whispers, almost to himself, "I used to think they were mad to keep training after midnight. Now I know. Freedom doesn't sleep." The camera lingers on him. An old man standing by a fence that no longer holds anyone, until only his silhouette remains against the rising dust. Then silence. Only breath, footsteps, and the soft hum of floodlights cutting through the fog. History often remembers war in numbers. Casualties, tonnage, divisions, and victories. But what truly lingers are the transformations no statistic can capture. In that California desert, Carl Brenner did not witness America's strength in its weapons or its victories, but in its will. The unrelenting rhythm of men who trained when no one was watching, who believed freedom required work, not worship. He came from a world where obedience meant survival, where fear was mistaken for discipline, and silence for loyalty. Yet behind the barbed wire, he saw something disarmingly simple. Men laughing while crawling through mud, soldiers tying the boots of their fallen comrades, an officer who could command without shouting. These were not gestures of weakness. They were signs of a different kind of power, the kind that outlasts wars. Years later, when Brenner returned, he found the fence gone, but the sound unchanged. The echo of footsteps under the floodlights was still there, the sound of freedom being renewed each night by a new generation. The desert hadn't changed, only the eyes that saw it. In one of his last letters, Brenner wrote, "The enemy that conquered me had no uniform. It was truth, simple and patient. It waited behind the fence until I was ready to see it." Perhaps that is what history is, not the clash of armies, but the slow awakening of understanding. And maybe that's why stories like his matter, because they remind us that strength built on fear dies with the order that gives it. But strength built on choice endures in silence. The moon rises again over Camp Pendleton. The floodlights hum. Young men still run through dust and sweat, unaware that long ago, a man once stood behind the same wire, watching, and found his own liberation in their footsteps.